What are situations that trigger our physical and emotional reactions? Today we're going to explore the world of triggers. What are they and how can we manage them so that we control our triggers don't control us? You know, each of us have a trigger point. That's right. Just like a fingerprint, it's unique for each and every one of us. Today, I want to explore the world of triggers. I want to ask, where do they come from? Why do they seem to be more prevalent? And then finally, what can we do? I want to give you some practical exercises that will help you identify and manage the emotional triggers of your life. You know, as human beings, we were made for one thing, and that was to survive. Within us is this incredible mechanism which helps us survive from one minute to the next. It's almost as if we have this radar within us that is constantly seeking anything that might threaten our survival. And anything that comes up, anything that triggers some form of suspicion, we go into an automatic response. And that's exactly what our triggers are. Our triggers are there to help us. Our triggers are there to make sure that we survive. And our emotions are responses to help us deal with different things that are happening in the moment. Our fear, our sadness, our surprise, our anger, all of them have evolved to help us deal with critical situations, and each of them has a trigger point. So therefore, it's incredibly important to know what our individual triggers are and why do they seem more prevalent nowadays. You know, after the Second World War, as we went into the Cold War, the War College developed an acronym to express the world that we were entering. They called it VUCA. And VUCA stood for V, volatile, U, uncertain, C, complex, and A, ambiguous. What they were trying to express was this geopolitical reality, but you know, in many ways, they perfectly express the world that we're living in now. How many of us are in workplaces that are becoming more complex? How many of us are in workplaces where the speed of change seems to get quicker and quicker and quicker? And you know, as human beings, we like safety. As human beings, we generally do not like change. And therefore, the result is, perhaps more than any other time, we are more triggered. And so it's incredibly important to identify what are my unique triggers and do I know them? And over the years, I've run many workshops on emotional intelligence. And one of the questions I always ask is, what are your unique particular triggers? And I've heard so many unique triggers that people have in the workplace. Listen to some of these, perhaps they're your triggers too. Angry stakeholder. You come into work, you're feeling happy, you get on the phone, the first person you talk to is furious because of something that's happened that wasn't your fault. For some, that triggers them into an angry escalation as well. The simple words, budget cuts, can evoke anxiety around a whole organization. And for some, it triggers them into fear and anger. For others, the trigger is being talked over. I worked with a client a few years ago, and she was saying that it was a meeting that she had that where a person would always talk over her. She was so derailed by that person's actions. Maybe it's a passing negative comment or a sarcastic comment. Sometimes those comments trigger us and we begin to shut down. Because of the complexity of the workplace, sometimes it's being left out of the loop because of the complexity that goes into making a decision. And for some people, being left out of the loop is also a trigger. Those are just a few. Why don't you take a moment now and think, what triggers me? What have I noticed about my own unique trigger pattern? Because when we're able to name the triggers, we then become able to identify ways of managing those triggers as well. So why is it important that we know our triggers? Well, it's really important because it impacts how we show up in the workplace. You know, whenever we are triggered, our ability to learn lessens. That's right, our ability to have new pieces of information and to digest that information stops because we're triggered in the moment. Also, we begin to have more binary vision. everything becomes this or that, our ability to see complexity is reduced. And we know if there's one thing that our world gives us today is ever-growing complexity. And so therefore, the ability to be curious becomes incredibly important. We also see some people just shutting down and shutting their doors literally, disappearing, because they don't want to face the anxiety or the stress that they're trying to deal with. All of these patterns are incredibly important because they impact not only ourselves, but the whole workplace around us. So then the next question is, what can we do about this? Let me give you 3 ideas, 3 practices that you might want to integrate into your life. First is becoming more aware of when we have triggered and the physiological actions that are happening because of that triggering. Let's take one emotion, fear. What happens normally when we are triggered for fear? Well, it's really interesting. First of all, a message goes to the brain. It says, hey brain, you've just been triggered for fear. You don't need high-level processing. We just need to deal with what is making us afraid. And so oxygen is drained from the brain. And then that oxygen goes to other parts of the body because we may have to fight or we may want to flee. And so our breathing becomes stronger as the oxygen goes to our lungs. Our heart begins to beat a little bit stronger, sending blood to all the different parts of our body. Blood is drained from our stomach because, let's face it, if we're in the middle of a fear attack, we don't need to eat. And that's why sometimes we begin to feel nauseous when we're afraid. All of a sudden, our voice begins to drop because our saliva becomes dry. We don't want to say anything in case we've got the scary monsters. That's part of our evolution. And so our saliva dries up. And then finally, all the blood goes to our muscles in the leg. And if we have nowhere to go, then our leg begins to shake. These are physiological signs that we may be triggered for fear. So therefore, knowledge of triggers, the unique trigger pattern, and how physiologically it shows up in our body can help us have quicker and faster reactions. You know, so often we walk around and we've got our bellies sucked in all day. And yet real breathing, true breathing, is breathing from our diaphragm. We should be able to feel our belly buttons expanding and contracting as we breathe. That type of breathing helps us to become calmer. It disengages the fight and flight mechanism that's been engaged and helps us towards calm. And then finally, I want to introduce you to a little practice that I've developed, which is called the 7-second reset. What the 7-second reset is all about is resetting us in the moment, acknowledging that we've been triggered, and then resetting the buttons so that we can act out of a place of choice and calm. Now, what's a 7-second reset? Well, very basically it is, second number 1, is place your feet on the ground. Placing your feet on the ground and beginning to feel your feet in your shoes. That physicality disengages with some of the emotionality that we're feeling in the brain. Seconds 2, 3, and 4 is breathing in. And as we breathe in, we also want to do a very quick body scan. How are we feeling in the moment? Where's some of the tension we're feeling? Are we feeling tension in our shoulders? Are we feeling tension in our jaws? 5, 6, and 7 is breathing out and letting go some of that tension and making adjustments in the moment with our posture so that we are more alert and open and we are ready to respond in the way that we want. Our emotional triggers are part of life. And it seems that everyone has to deal with them multiple times a day. But you know what? We have power to deal and manage with our triggers. They don't necessarily have to lead us into automatic functioning. I've developed a practice which I just shared with you, the 7-second reset. And here's a resource that you can use. So remember to sign up for this free resource and receive a daily reminder each day to practice that reset.